In the summer of 1974, I was stationed on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Mackinac. We worked the Great Lakes. The Mackinac was an icebreaker. We were stationed in Sheboygan, Michigan, but that summer the ship had moved over to Sheboygan, Wisconsin to be in dry dock to go through ship repairs. In the beginning of July that summer, I had been given 30 days of leave, and I wanted to take them. I was feeling pretty miserable about life. I was struggling with an alcohol problem, doing any type of drugs that would come along. I basically was just a very unhappy person. So I was going to hitchhike home and get on a plane and fly down to friends down in North Carolina, spend a couple weeks down there, and then come back to Michigan. So I hitchhiked down the Door County Peninsula in Wisconsin, down through Green Bay, Wisconsin, and up towards the Upper Peninsula of Michigan where I lived. I came to the town of Menominee, Michigan, and I was hitchhiking there. I needed to go up US 2 all the way to Monastic, Michigan, where my parents lived. A car pulled over. It was an Impala, light blue with a white vinyl top on it. And the man stopped, and so I got in, and he said, "Look, I can only give you a ride about 5 miles. I've got an appointment that I have to go to." And I said, "That would be great. That'll get me to the outside of town, and that's where it's better to hitchhike." So we got in the car, and as was my custom when I hitchhiked a lot back then, I began to ask questions. What do you do? What are you doing here? And so forth and so on. And he told me he was there setting up a mission for youth. He worked for a certain church, and he was there to lead young people to Christ. Well, I was curious about that, especially when he told me that he had been in college. I wanted to go to college. He played guitar. I played guitar. He was involved in a lot of the things I wanted to be involved in. And long story short, he told me how miserable he had been. And I could really relate to this guy. And he told me that he accepted Jesus Christ as his Savior, and everything changed. Well, I was curious, and I began to ask questions. You see, I was an alcoholic, and I was taking all kinds of drugs at the time, trying to salve the pains in my life. And I had been on acid and watched the movie The Exorcist. Man, I'll tell you, that freaked me out. And so I asked this guy, "Hey, is it possible to become demon-possessed in these modern times?" 1974. He said, "Absolutely." Long story short, he gave me a ride 55 miles, and he told me about Jesus. He told me about God. He told me how to have a Savior. I was so impressed, and I thanked him very much. And when he left, I rolled a joint, smoked it, hitchhiked the rest of the way home. 30 days later, I was hitchhiking back to the ship, but now the ship had moved from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, down to Grand Haven, Michigan. August 4 is called Coast Guard Day, and the Mackinac would be a part of that celebration. So I had to hitchhike down the western side of the state of Michigan. While I was hitchhiking, 2 children came riding their bicycles out. I was standing on the side of US 131 up in northwestern Michigan. These kids came riding out on their bicycles and had a sack. And they said, "We saw you hitchhiking and thought you might be hungry." I said, I'm not hungry. I just ate just a few minutes ago at a restaurant." And they said, No, you have to take this. You have to take this." Well, the boy was about 9. The girl was around 7, and I didn't want to hurt their feelings, so I took it. It began to rain, and so I told them, "Be careful when you cross the street, and thank you." When they left, I opened the bag up, and there was a cup, instant malted milk, and I thought, I don't need that. In fact, I wondered, maybe they're trying to poison me, so I threw it in the woods. Then there was a sandwich. I didn't want it, so I threw it in the woods. Then there was a fudge brownie. I thought, that's pretty good, so I put it in my pocket. But to my amazement, in the bottom of that sack was a little pocket Bible. my mind immediately went back 30 days before when I had that encounter with that fella over in Wisconsin. And I kept that Bible because I thought something's happening in my life. Well, I made it to the ship in a day or two, and I took the Bible and I put it in my locker. I forgot about the Bible until January 1975. I got in trouble, and I was restricted to the ship for 30 days. I had nowhere to go. Kind of felt like a caged lion in a way. Could only go so far, this way, that way. Couldn't get to shore. I could get some drugs, but I couldn't get drunk like I wanted to. And so I was feeling pretty miserable, and I began to question a lot of things in my life. Questions like, what do I do if I don't drink? What do I do if I don't do drugs? Do I want a wife that does this just like me? Do I want to raise kids in this type of environment? What kind of a job can I get? All these questions began to haunt me, and I began to think, I need an alternative. I need something better than what I've got, but I didn't have a clue what it could be. And then I remembered that Bible. So I went to my locker and I started digging around, and I found that Bible. I began to read the Bible. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 is the first verse in the Bible. I read it. It simply says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Something spoke to me in that verse. Something became real concerning God. I didn't know God at the time in my life. In fact, I tried to convince myself I was an atheist. I wouldn't have to answer to God, even though deep down inside I knew there was a God. So I read that Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And something really convinced me God does exist. So I began to read more of the Scriptures, and I found some fellas on the ship who were Christians, and I asked them questions. And one night, while I was standing watch down in the engine room, had my earphones on and had the great big diesel engines that I was standing between, I was walking between them, checking their oil pressure and different things like that, their oil levels, and all of a sudden, in front of me, I had a vision. I saw a throne, a beautiful throne. I could see from the knees down, but I knew it was Jesus sitting on the throne. I just knew it. And there were gold stands coming out from the corner of the throne, and kind of a velvet type rope that you see at a bank or at a post office or someplace where they have to have the crowd wind around. And on one side that was facing the throne were a group of people. On the other side was another group of people. And as I watched in this vision, all the people I liked, the rock and rollers, the jet setters, the movie crowd, Hollywood, all the folks I thought really had it made, the rich, the famous, people who looked like life had really given them a good hand, the people I wanted to be with and be like, they were all on one side. The other people right directly in front of the throne were people that basically I thought would be kind of boring. People that had gardens, good family people, nice folks to talk to, but nobody you'd hang out with because their life certainly had to be boring. Well, as I watched this, it dawned on the people on this side that they could not get to the throne. And in tremendous anguish and pain, they began to weep and gnash their teeth. In fact, they began to choke one another. And this side, these people just kept walking happily towards the throne. While I was standing there, I said to the Lord, "That's it, Lord. I want to be with the group that gets to go to your throne." I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know really entirely what it meant, but I knew I'd made some type of a decision. Well, 3 days later, I was laying in my bed. It's called a rack on a ship. And I was just laying there, and all of a sudden, this evil presence came around me. I knew it was the devil. I'd had a bad trip on LSD and seemed like I'd seen him face to face. I knew what he was like. I knew what it felt like to be in his presence. And this heavy weight came upon me as I laid there. I couldn't move my feet. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't move my legs. I could not even move my head. And this weight kept getting heavier and heavier and heavier until it became hard for me to breathe. I knew I was in the process of being demon-possessed. There was nothing I could do to prevent it on my own. I had walked with the devil, and now he came to claim me as his. But I remembered what I had experienced with God in that vision. And so I cried out with all my heart. I cried out to Jesus. I said, Jesus, please save me from my sins. And I began to confess my sins. When I was in the 6th grade, I stole a balsam wood airplane from Schmidt's drugstore from the small town where I lived. I confessed that. I confessed every sin I could think of. And I begged Jesus to come into my life, come into my heart, deliver me from this demon. There was a glow that appeared around me, and the darkness kind of went back. And this glow appeared around me, and then right here in my chest, a warm feeling came upon me, and it went up and filled me this way, and then it went down and filled my extremities. And I knew Jesus had accepted me as His. I knew I was loved by God. I knew I had found what I was looking for. And I also knew two things. Number one, I did not have to drink anymore. I did not have to do drugs. I had found what real happiness in life is. And then number two, I would share this story with anyone who would listen, knowing that they also would find true happiness when they found peace with the Lord. Now that's my story. That's how I became acquainted with Jesus Christ. The same God who inserted Himself into my life back in 1974 is trying to do that into your life. The very fact that you're listening to this demonstrates that God is wanting you to experience what I experienced. He wants you to ask Jesus to be your Savior. How do you do that? You simply admit that you're a sinner, and you ask Jesus to be your Savior. Ask Him to come into your heart. He will. And when He comes into your heart, you'll have a sense of peace with God. You'll have a sense of wholeness, and you'll experience what I experienced, and that is what happiness is in this life.